Hi everyone, and I apologize for the poor lighting, but I have a sleeping puppy next to me, and so I don't want to be making a lot of moves, and I'll stay a little bit quieter. What I wanted to talk about today is just that people still seem to get FI and NE, well, wrong or very wrong. And so I wanted to bring up a specific case study to examine, and perhaps this is helpful in your own reflection as to whether or not this resonates with you. And that is, for this particular case, I'll go way back to my early teenage years, childhood, and I had and still have a friend who, in modern terms, I understand to be an ESTP. Of course, none of us understood any of this stuff back in the day. But he was someone who grew up with a troubled family life. He had a difficult childhood, and we were brought together by our own respective challenges as kids. And so he and I got along in many things, but he had a penchant for, it's not a certain mix of arrogance and insecurity and feeling the world owed him something and just a lot of pent-up anger. At least that's my interpretation of it. This sort of tempest of things happening with him emotionally and, well, I'd say lack of maturity, but we're early teenagers. Of course we're not mature. He, one day, among many of the other stories I could tell, the one that seems relevant is that one day this isn't the one day part, but we lived close to a nursery and landscaping company. And his house was in that area, and one day a pickup truck showed up with workers that dropped off shovels and burlap sacks and rope and all sorts of other things to do some work later. And then they took off. And so this piqued my friend's interest. And he went onto the property of the nursery to check out what they had there and saw it was shovels and burlap sacks and all kinds of other stuff. And something about the world owes him something, or maybe just doing it for the sake of doing it, something kicked in to say that he came to the conclusion that he was going to take that stuff. And I, for my part, did nothing to stop him. I just didn't say anything. It didn't occur to me to say anything. It was probably distressing to me that he would do something like this, but I didn't know how to respond or react. So he did go onto the property, grabbed armfuls of stuff, ran back across the way back to his own house, and took the things that he'd absconded with and put them in the garage. And this now forgotten, 10 minutes later, we're in the cellar, on the other side of the open garage, doing whatever next thing that teenagers do when they have short attention spans. And suddenly we have a very angry landscaping foreman who's in the house, in the basement, face to face with us, screaming about stealing and calling the police and letting our parents know and so on and so forth. Carrying on because he is, who knows, he was visibly unhappy about this turn of events. And my ESTP friend, being fast on the draw, started coming up with excuses to say, well, it wasn't us. We have brothers. Somebody else must have, some of our younger brothers must have done this. And anyway, the foreman kept yelling and carrying on. And then after whatever standoff had been concluded, took off, took his stuff, went back to his own property, and the crews went about doing whatever they'd planned to do. So that's the circumstances. Now we look back at this and we can pull it apart to say what could or should have been done differently, and or what's the outcome of all of this. And while it is obviously self-serving for me to say so, looking back, knowing that I didn't have the tools or the thinking at the time, the ability to react and respond, to understand that it was within me to have agency to say, no, we shouldn't do this. This is a bad idea. Don't go on that property. Don't do these things. But in doing so, I could potentially put our friendship and trust at risk. I did nothing, which preserved the relationship that we had, and that in the long term may have been the better outcome. I mean, we'll never know because we've never tested this alternative route. But I do know that we remained friends for a long time, and when we drifted apart, it was because we were pulled in different directions, and he ended up on a good path, and he's today actually successful, I hope happy. He has all of the trappings of what seems to be a happy and fulfilled life. So the way that I see it, as I said, is that perhaps through inaction, it was the best thing that I could do instead of forcing the relationship. Instead, the sorts of things that I would do with our friendship was to pull him in other directions than to be guided by his anger a lot of the time, or to direct his anger into things like playing tabletop role-playing games or board games or using our imagination in other ways. And so in this way, we got to experience the play of childhood, where his anger could bubble over and he would take it out on his younger brother or on doing these sorts of delinquent acts. And at times I was present when that would happen, and I did not. I just tried to stay away from it and not endorse it, and at the same time not break off the friendship over it. So this non-action and yet ongoing evaluation is kind of one example of NE. I could FINE, that is, I'm sorry. There's lots of other things that I could bring up in terms of having done wrong things in relationships, but I really don't care to reopen some of those old cases. I mean, both to make me look bad, and I don't want to make anyone else look bad. I mean, I probably look bad enough with having done nothing while basically being an accomplice by doing nothing while someone else indulged in their delinquency. Anyway, going back to FI and what this means. When people think of FI being authenticity, well, there's nothing authentic in any of these actions or revisiting what the correctness would have been of what to do here. Did I act with congruency? Well, I suppose I was consistent in being passive and failing to act. And while that can be blamed on blind spot SE, whether or not that holds true, the point is again that the rumination over this, the ongoing evaluation, is something that I think a lot of people wouldn't bother with, or they would just let it bother them. But to reopen and reconsider, was this the right course of action? Is there something else that should have been done? Would there have been something more correct? what are other possible outcomes of this life versus that? Anyway, possibilities for evaluation through introverted feeling. So this also doesn't provide any strict moral code or values or anything here. I suppose it's values so insofar as I am making an evaluation as to whether or not what I did was right or wrong without any firm conclusion, and I can continue to revisit this and evaluate this over time. I mean, it's only been 40 some odd years, so what's a few years between friends? And there are an endless barrage of such cases, not from 40 years ago, but from yesterday or last week or last month. And while I'm not explicitly keeping track of all these various things, who knows when something might pop up that's relevant, and that a current evaluation may open up some past considerations that are also relevant to the case. What I can say is that this whole thing, the situation that I described, could be turned into a metaphor where the nursery itself becomes a battlefield and the ESTP and I are fellow soldiers, and that incursion is an act of bold defiance that provokes retaliation from enemy forces that then results in a breach and some sort of massacre or bad outcome for those involved. It's very easy to take the feelings of what happened in the situation and transcode it into some other set of circumstances that allow it to be metaphorically examined for the correctness of the participants, whether or not that is considered a more comfortable distance at which to look at the possible variations of what does this mean for different types of correctness, and if you have it writ large into what is good and evil, it can become sort of a meditation of virtue and sin, for example, and karma. But that's, a whole other story. So anyway, I want to conclude it there, but I did want to provide just an example of this is FI and NE as I understand it. It is this in endless variations on the theme, various examinations of this gem or that from different angles to understand or derive some new meaning that might not have been understood before. And in the evaluation, see what is correct or important or congruent or out of place. And while feeling is the instrument that is being used in order to get that understanding to reach those temporary conclusions or potential insights, or at least perform the analysis whether or not there's anything useful that comes out of it. It doesn't mean that there's necessarily any deep emotional investment. In fact, there's the interests to remove oneself from bias and the recognition that even in the retelling of something that happened such a long time ago, there's probably inherent bias in the way that the memories are brought back. But that again goes into the key metaphor or parable of what I described also being symbolic. So it's not that far a stretch from what I described as happened being representative of the actual things that may have happened those 40 years ago. So anyway, if you're thoroughly confused, then perhaps join the club. But I hope that's some idea of how this process works, and perhaps how it can, pull apart anything from a conversation 5 minutes ago to something that happened more than 40 years ago. And with that, I'll bid you a good evening, morning, or if you're where I am, a good night. Bye for now.